This is the Unit 4 of Class 12th, Theme 1, History Book, Thinkers, Believers and Building, Cultural Development. In this chapter, we shall go a long journey across 1,000 years to read about the philosophies and their attempts to understand in the world they inhabited, philosophers के बारे में. We will also see how their ideas were compiled as oral, written text as well as expressed in architecture and sculpture. These are indicative of the enduring influence these thinkers had on people. While we will be focusing on Buddhism, it is very important to remember that this tradition did not develop in isolation. There were several other traditions which each engaged in debates, dialogues with others. The sources that historians use to reconstruct this exciting world of ideas and belief include Buddhist, Jain, Brahminical texts, as well as a large and impressive body of material remains, including monuments, inscriptions. So, among the best preserved monument of this time is the stupa at Sanchi, which is a major focus in this chapter. So, we'll have a glimpse of Sanchi. Okay? Sanchi in the 19th century, the most wonderful ancient building in the state of Bhopal are at Sanchi Kanakhera. This is a small village under the brow of a hill some 20 miles northeast of Bhopal, which we visited yesterday. We inspected the stone sculptures and statues of Buddha and an ancient gateway. The ruins appear to be the object of great interest to European gentlemen. Alexander Cunningham वहाँ पे रुके थे several weeks in this neighborhood and examined these ruins most carefully. He took drawings of the place, deciphered their inscription and both sat down these tombs. The result of his investigation were described by him in an English work. This is Shahjahan Begum. And this is a sculpture from Sanchi. Okay? 19th century Europeans were very interested in the stupa at Sanchi. In fact, जो French थे, they sought शाहजहां Begum's permission to take away the eastern gateway. ठीक है? East में जो gateway लगा हुआ था, which was the best preserved to be displayed in a museum in France. For a while, some Englishmen also wanted to use the same, but fortunately, both the French and English were satisfied with carefully prepared plaster cast copies and the original remain at the site part of the Bhopal estate. The ruler of Bhopal, Shahjahan Begum, and her successor Sultan Jahan Begum provided money for the preservation of the ancient site. No wonder then that John Marshall dedicated his important volume on Sanchi to Sultan Jahan. He funded the museum that was built there as well as the guest house where he lived and wrote the volume. She also funded the publication of the volume. So, if the stupa complex has survived, it is in no small measure due to the wise decision and to good luck in escaping the eyes of railway contractor, builder, and those looking for finds to carry away to the Museum of Europe. One of the most important Buddhist center, the discovery of Sachi was vastly transformed um, has vastly transformed our understanding of early Buddhism. Today, it is testimony to the successful restoration and preservation of a key archaeological site by the ASI. The Great Stupa at Sachi. If you travel from Delhi to Bhopal by train, you will see the majestic stupa complex on top of hill, crowning it as it were. If you request the guard, he will stop the train at the little station of Sachi for 2 minutes, enough time for you to get down. As you climb up the hill, you can see the complex of sculptures, a large mound, and other monuments, including a temple built in the 5th century. But what is the significance of this monument? But why was the mound built and what did it contain? Why is there a stone railing around it? Who built the complex or paid for its construction? When was it discovered? There is a fascinating story that we can uncover at Sachi, for which we must combine information from text, sculpture, architecture, inscription. Let us begin exploring the background of the early Buddhist tradition. The first millennium BC is often regarded, the mid first millennium BC is often regarded as the turning point in the world history. It saw the emergence of a thinker such as Zarathustra in Iran, Kongzi in China, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle in Greece, Mahavira, Gautam Buddha, among many others in India. Take a Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in Greece, Zarathustra in Iran, Kongzi in China. Try to understand the mysteries of existence and the relationship between human being and the cosmic order. This was also the time when new kingdoms and cities were developing and social and economic life was changing. So everything was changing in this period in a variety of ways in the Ganga Valley. These thinkers attempted to understand these development as well. There were several pre-existing traditions of thought, religious belief, बहुत सारी थॉट्स थी उस टाइम की, Religious belief अलग थी, practices थी, including the early Vedic tradition known from the Rig Veda, compiled between 1500 BCE से 1000 BCE. The Rig Veda consists of hymns in praise of a variety of deities, especially Agni, Idra, Soma. Many of these hymns were chanted when sacrifices were performed, where people prayed for cattle, sons, good health, long life, etc. At first, sacrifices were performed collectively. Later, जैसे जैसे टाइम आगे बढ़ता गया, some were performed by the heads of the household for the well-being of the domestic unit. More elaborate sacrifices such as Rajasuya and Ashwamedh sacrifice were performed by the chiefs and the king who depended on Brahmin priests to conduct the ritual. New question. Many ideas found in the Upanishad of the 6th century BC onwards show that people were curious about the meaning of life and the possibility of life after death. कि क्या होने वाला है भाई, कि लाइफ की हम लोग पैदा हुए हैं, इसका मतलब क्या है, ठीक है, लाइफ आफ्टर डेथ क्या होगा, एंड रीबर्थ. तो वॉज रीबर्थ ड्यू टू द पास्ट एक्शन? Such issues were hotly debated. Thinkers were concerned with understanding and expressing the nature of the ultimate reality, and others outside the very tradition asked whether or not there even was a single ultimate reality. People also began speculating on the significance of the sacrificial tradition. We get a glimpse of a lively discussion and debate from the Buddhist text, which mention as many as 64 sect or school of thought. Teachers travel from place to place trying to convince one another as well as lay persons about the validity of their philosophy. तो देखो, अपने फिलॉसफी को वैलिडेट करवाना, उसको स्प्रेड करवाना, ठीक है, और द वे दे अंडरस्टूड द वर्ड. डिबेट टुक प्लेस इन Kuttagarsala, literally a hut with a pointed roof, or in groves where the travelling mendicants halted. If a philosopher succeeded in convincing one of his rivals, the followers of the latter also became his disciples, so support for any particular sect could grow and shrink over time. Many of these teachers, including Mahavira and Buddha, they questioned the authority of the Vedas. They also emphasized individual agency, suggesting that men and women could strive to attain liberation from the trials and tribulation of worldly existence. तो आप इंडिविजुअली भी ट्राई करो तो ये वर्ल्डली एग्जिस्टेंस से आप निकल सकते हो बाहर. So this was in marked contrast to the Brahminical position, wherein, as we have seen, an individual existence was thought to be determined by his or her birth in a specific caste or gender. So here are the two verses from the Chandogya Upanishad. It is a text composed in Sanskrit in 6th century BCE. This self of mind within the heart is smaller than paddy or barley or mustard or millet or the kernel of a seed of a millet. This self of mind within the heart is greater than the earth. ठीक है, within the earth, greater than the earth, greater than the intermediate space, greater than heaven, greater than these worlds. This one, the wind that blows, this is surely a sacrifice. While moving, it sanctifies all this. Therefore, it is indeed a sacrifice. Now, this is here the two verses from the Rig Veda invoking Agni, the god of fire, often identified with the sacrificial fire, into which offerings were made so as to reach the other deities. Bring, O strong one, this sacrifice of ours to the god. O wise one, as a liberal giver, bestow on us. O priest, abundant food. Agni obtained by sacrificing mighty wealthy for us. Procure, O Agni, forever to him who prays to you nourishment. The wonderful cow, may a son be ours, offspring that continues our line. Verses as these were composed in a special kind of Sanskrit known as Vedic Sanskrit. They were taught orally to men belonging to priestly families. Now debates and discussion की बात करते हैं, ये हमने पढ़ लिया. नेक्स्ट आते हैं हाउ बुद्धिस्ट टेक्स्ट वर प्रिपेयर्ड एंड प्रिजर्व. द बुद्धा एंड अदर टीचर्स दे टॉट orally. After discussion and debate, men and women, perhaps children as well, they attended these discourses. वहाँ discussion हो रहा होता है and discuss what they heard. None of the Buddha's speeches were written down during his lifetime. लेकिन जब उनकी डेथ हो गई from the 54th century BCE, 54th 54th century BCE, his teachings were compiled by his disciples at his council of elders or senior monks at Vaishali, that is Pali for Vaishali, in present day Vishali. वैशाली जो बिहार में है उसको पाली में वैशाली लिखते हैं. These compilations were known as Tripitaka, literally three baskets to hold the different types of text. They were first transmitted orally and then written and classified according to length as well as the subject matter. सबसे पहले हम लोग विनय पिटाका की बात करते हैं. इसमें रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशन फॉर दोज हु जॉइन द संघ और मोनास्टिक ऑर्डर. बुद्धा की टीचिंग वर इंक्लूडेड इन सुत्ता पिटाका. अभिधम्मा पिटाका डील विद फिलोसॉफिकल मैटर्स. सो ईच पिटाका फिलोसफी अभिधम. बुद्धा की टीचिंग सुत्ता पिटाका, ठीक है. Later commentaries were written on these texts by Buddhist scholars as Buddhism traveled to new regions such as Sri Lanka. The other texts such as Deepvamsa, literally the chronicle of the island, and Mahavamsa, the great chronicle, were written containing regional histories of the Buddhism. Many of these works contain biographies of the Buddha. Some of the older texts are in Pali while later compositions are in Sanskrit. पहले पाली में फिर संस्कृत में. जब बुद्धिज्म ईस्ट एशिया में गया तो pilgrims such as Fahin and Huansang traveled all the way from China in India to India in search of texts. They took back to their own country, where they were translated by scholars. Indian Buddhist teachers also traveled to faraway places carrying texts to disseminate the teaching of Buddha. तो बुद्धा की टीचिंग को स्प्रेड कर रहे थे. Buddhist texts were preserved in manuscript for several centuries in monasteries in different parts of Asia. Modern translations have been prepared from Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, and Tibetan text. Next देखते हैं. Beyond the worldly pleasures, the message of Mahavira. The basic philosophy of the Jainas was already in existence in North India before the birth of Vardhaman, who came to be known as Mahavira in 6th century BCE. According to Jain tradition, Mahavira was preceded by 23 other teachers or Tirthankar, literally those who guide men and women across the river of existence. The most important idea in Jainism is that the entire world is animated. Even stories, rocks, and water have life. Non-injury to living beings, especially to human, animal, plant, insect is central to Jaina philosophy. In fact, the principle of ahimsa emphasized within Jainism has left its mark on the Indian thinking as a whole. According to Jain teaching, the cycle of birth rebirth is shaped through karma, asceticism एंड पेनेंस. आप मतलब आपका जो बर्थ और रिबर्थ होगा वो आपके कर्मा डिटरमाइन करेगा. एसेटिज्म एंड पेनेंस आर रिक्वायर्ड टू फ्री oneself from the cycle of karma. This can be achieved only by renouncing the world. Therefore, monastic existence is a necessary condition of salvation. Jain monks and nuns too took 5 vows. Monastic. This can be achieved only by renouncing the world. Renounce कर दो, monastic existence लो. Jain monks and nuns they took 5 vows: to abstain from killing, stealing, lying, to observe celibacy, to abstain from possessing property. Image of Tirthankar from Mathura, a 3rd century. The world beyond the place. Just as the Buddha's teaching were compiled by his followers, the teaching of Mahavira were also recorded by his disciples. They were often in form of stories, ठीक है, which could be appeal to ordinary people. Here is one example from a Prakrit text known as Uttardhyana Sutta, describing how a queen named Kamlavati tried to persuade her husband to renounce the world. Uttardhyana Sutta. Uttara Dhyana Sutta. If the whole world and all its treasures were yours, you would not be satisfied, nor would all this be able to save you. When you die, O king, leave all things behind. Dhamma alone and nothing else will save you. As a bird dislikes the cage, so do I dislike the world. I shall live as a nun without offspring, without desire, without the love of gain, and without the hatred. Those who have enjoyed pleasures and renounced them move about like the wind and go wherever they please, unchecked like birds in their flight. Leave your last kingdom, abandon what pleases the senses, be without attachment and property, then practice severe penance and being in form of energy. So basically the spread of Jainism की बात करते हैं. Gradually Jainism spread to many parts of India. Like Buddhist, Jain scholars produce a wealth of literature and a variety of language, जैसे कि प्राकृत, संस्कृत, तमिल में लिखा है. For centuries, manuscripts of these texts were carefully preserved in libraries attached to the temple. Some of the earliest stone sculptures associated with religious traditions were produced by devotees of the Jain Tirthankar and have been recovered from several sites throughout the subcontinent. अब यहाँ पे देखते हैं. This is a page from the 14th century Jain manuscript. Buddha and the quest for enlightenment. One of the most influential teachers of the time was the Buddha. Over the centuries, his message spread across the subcontinent beyond, that is through Central Asia to China, Korea, Japan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia. How do you know about the Buddha's teaching? These have been reconstructed by careful editing, translating, analyzing the Buddhist text mentioned earlier. Historians have also tried to reconstruct the details of his life from hagiography. Details of his life from hagiography. Many of these, अब ये hagiography क्या है एक बार ध्यान देख लेते हैं. It is a biography of a saint or a religious leader. Hagiography often praise the saint's achievement and may not always be literally accurate. They are important because they tell us about the belief of the followers of that particular tradition. Many of these were written down at least a century after the time of Buddha in an attempt to preserve memoirs of the great teacher. According to these traditions, Siddhartha, as the Buddha was named at birth, was the son of a chief of the Sakya clan. He had a sheltered upbringing within the palace, insulated from the harsh realities of life. One day he persuaded his charioteer to take him into the city. His first journey into the world outside was traumatic. He was deeply anguished when he saw an old man, sick man, and a corpse. He realized in that moment that the decay and the destruction of the human body was inevitable. He also saw a homeless mendicant who, it seemed to him, had come to terms with old age, disease, and death and found peace. Siddhartha decided that he too would adopt the same path. Soon after, he left the palace and set out in search of his own truth. Siddhartha explored several paths, including bodily mortification, which led him to a situation of near death. Bodily mortification. Abandoning these extreme methods, he meditated for several days and finally attained enlightenment. After this, he came to be known as the Buddha or the Enlightened One. For the rest of his life, he taught Dhamma or the path of righteous living. So, this is a sculpture from Amravati, Andhra Pradesh, depicting the departure of the Buddha from his palace. Next, the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha teachings have been reconstructed from stories found mainly in the Sutta Pitaka. Although some stories described his miraculous powers, others suggest that the Buddha tried to convince people through reason and persuasion rather than through display of supernatural power. कुछ कहते हैं कि उनके पास supernatural power थी, miraculous power थी. कुछ कहते हैं नहीं, वो अपने subjects को convince करते थे through reasons and persuasion. For instance, when a grief-stricken woman whose children had died came to Buddha, he gently convinced her about the inevitability of death rather than bringing her son back to life. These stories were narrated in the language spoken by ordinary people so that these could be easily understood. According to Buddhist philosophy, the word is transient, it is anika, and constantly changing. It is also soulless, anatta. अनिका ट्रांजिएंट चेंज हो रहा है क्षणिक अन्यथा सोललेस एज देयर इज नथिंग परमानेंट और इटर्नल इन इट ठीक चेंज हो रहा है कुछ भी परमानेंट और इटर्नल नहीं है विद दिस ट्रांजिएंट वर्ड sorrow is intrinsic to human existence. It is by following the path of moderation between severe penance and self-indulgence that human beings can rise above these worldly troubles. In the earlier form of Buddhism, whether or not God existed was relevant. This is an example from the Sutta Pitaka and contains the advice given by the Buddha to a wealthy householder named Sigala. In 5 ways should a master look after his servant and employees: by assigning them work according to their strength, by supplying them with food and wages, by tending them in sickness, by sharing delicacies and granting leaves at time. In 5 ways should the clansmen look after the needs of Samanas, those who have renounced the world, and Brahmanas, by affection in act and speech and mind, by keeping open house to them and supplying their worldly needs. There is a similar instruction to Sigala about how to behave with his parent, teacher, and wife. The Buddha regards the social world as a creation of human rather than of divine origin. Therefore, he asked King Gahapati to be humane and ethical. ठीक है बुद्धा regarded the social world as the creation of human rather than of divine origin. इसलिए उन्होंने किंग और गहापति से कहा to be humane and ethical. Individual effort was expected to transform social relation. अगर आपको social relation transform करना है तो हर individual को इसके लिए strive करना पड़ेगा. The Buddha emphasized individual agency and each action as a means to escape from the cycle of rebirth and attain self-realization, nirvana, literally the existence of the extinguishing of the ego desire and thus end the cycle of suffering for those who renounce the world. According to Buddhist tradition, his last word to his followers were, "Be lamp unto yourself, as all of you must work out to your own liberation." Buddha emphasized individual agency, righteous action as a means to escape from cycle of birth and rebirth, attain self-realization and nirvana. Followers of Buddha soon they grew a body of disciples of the Buddha and he founded a Sangha. It is an organization of monks who too became teachers of Dhamma. These monks lived simply, possessing only the essential requisite for survival, such as bowl to receive food once a day from the laity. As they lived on alms, they were known as bhikkhus. Literally, initially only men were allowed into the Sangha, but later women were also admitted. According to Buddhist text, this was made possible through the mediation of Ananda, one of the Buddhist great disciples, who persuaded him to allow women into the Sangha. The Buddha's foster mother Mahapati Gautami was the first woman to be ordained as bhikkhuni. Many women who entered the Sangha became teachers of Dhamma and went on to become theras or respected women who had attained liberation. The Buddha followers came from many social groups. They included king, wealthy men, Gahapati, and also humbler folk, workers, slave, class people. The Buddha followers came from many Social group. These include king, wealthy men, Gahapati, and also humbler folk, workers, slaves, class people. Once within the Sangha, all were regarded as equal, having shed their earlier social identity on becoming bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. The internal functioning of the Sangha was based on the tradition of Gana and Sanghas, where consensus was arrived at through discussion. If that failed, decisions were taken by a vote on the subject. ठीक है, तो ये एक चीज़ है. ये थ्योरी कार्ड भी पढ़ लेते हैं. दिस इज अ यूनिक बुद्धिस्ट टेक्स्ट. इट इज अ पार्ट ऑफ सुत्ता पिटाका. इट्स अ collection of verses composed by bhikkhunis.